I'm Tobias Revel.
And I'm Radha Mystery.
And this is Futur-ish, a podcast about how nothing is new and everything has happened before.
We've been working and playing in futures for over a decade of hype and bluster amidst increasing uncertainty and complexity.
In each episode, we explore a recent event or signal for its historical context and speculate on future possibilities.
And make it make sense for people like you and me.
If it was just me and I didn't have a PhD and it took me 2 mornings a week to do an episode, fine, I'd do that. But it's the fact that I've got to really crunch down on PhD.
All I'm hearing is it's not my problem and it's not my fault, is what I'm hearing. Is that correct?
That is one way of interpreting it. Yeah, that's very leadership of you, actually. I'm quite impressed. It's very good. Want to start this shindig or what?
Let's start this shindig. Let's get through it.
This ongoing joke about the editing backlog is starting to get too much. So if anyone does have an idea for how we can monetize this shindig so we can pay somebody to edit, please let us know. Because I'm not going to ask someone to do it for free, of course.
Of course not.
All right.
That's not fair.
Well, I don't have updates. What I have
is
a note for me to find information about an update that I haven't done because I've been busy.
Okay, you assigned yourself homework and then you didn't do it, and it's in the show notes.
I didn't do it. Well, actually, I didn't assign myself homework. Someone commented on the birth rates episode that we hadn't made much mention of what China is doing, which is apparently quite a lot. And I thought, well, I'll research that. And then I didn't.
Well, the reason that I didn't make a mention of what China's doing is because I feel like that's all over everywhere. So I wanted to spotlight places, other countries. But thank you for listening. Thank you for commenting. Thank you for your engagement. Appreciate it. Okay, I don't know where to start with this one, and we'll see where it ends up. And maybe I'm connecting dots that don't need to be connected. But I got this targeted ad. Like, I've gotten them a couple times now, and it's the Four Seasons luxury yachts. And I don't know why. First of all, what about my Instagram usage says I can afford a luxury yacht holiday in the Mediterranean, where I looked up what the cost of like a suite was. And I think the least pricey version was $29,000 US. So I think it's like a week long trip. Yeah, man. That's not, we might, anyway, I don't understand. Something's messing up with the algorithms. But anyway, so I'd been getting these targeted ads for the Four Seasons, like luxury yachts. And I did a little bit of digging because first I was like, what even is this? It's a newer offering. And there was a press release that came out late last year. I think they've been running these since 2025. But the newest press release said that, Four Seasons Yachts unveils its 2027 Mediterranean season featuring 33 new voyages to more than 40 new destinations. And I was curious about this because I know we've done a thing about luxury boats before. And, what I found was there is this market for people who like the idea of cruising on the oceans, but don't want to do it in massive cruise ship style. They want something a little bit more curated, a little bit more boutique style. And so there are hospitality groups like the Four Seasons and also Ritz-Carlton who are now beginning to offer these like luxury cruise ship style offerings to rare destinations on smaller ship sizes for more kind of intimate and unique customer experiences. But it kind of got me thinking because I was wondering, why is the Four Seasons diversifying their portfolio to include yachts? And, they said like they're just trying to expand their business. But what I was curious about was part of this, does it have to do with climate change? Does it have to do with the fact that lots of these, resorts maybe are losing real estate, insurance is getting a little bit higher. It's becoming riskier and riskier to have things that are on kind of coastal properties. So are we starting to see this shift to the seas as a way to make sure that they still have a business in 50 or 100 years or whatever it is? So I went down a few different rabbit holes because of this. The first was I wanted to get a sense of what's really happening when it comes to hotels and whether or not they're actually losing land, losing real estate, having damaged property and infrastructure. What I found was that hotels are actively losing land, beaches, infrastructure due to climate change. I don't think that's a surprise. I think most people are probably kind of familiar with this. The threats include everything from rising sea levels to extreme weather like hurricanes, floods, and things that are causing physical damage and erosion. And then I found some data points, some facts. I know you like those. So a few different ones. Over 60% of, do you say Caribbean or Caribbean?
We say Caribbean.
All right. I don't know what I say, but I'll just choose one. So
give
over
it a go. Just take another run up at it. Like imagine going back to the back of the room and
all right.
start again.
All right. I'm backing up.
You're just saying it for the first time. Just let it come out.
All right. over 60% of Caribbean resorts, that was American? I don't know what that is. I don't know. Caribbean, are at risk from sea level rise. 60% is pretty massive, right? With thousands of coastal properties facing chronic flooding.
And I imagine that tourism is pretty much one of the biggest industries in the Caribbean.
Yeah, absolutely. So I wanted to get a sense of what are the different elements of the dangers that properties are facing. So there's coastal erosion and sea level rise. It's impacting places like the Maldives and the Caribbean. There's infrastructure damage because of storm surges, flooding, hurricanes. There's wildfire and drought in places like California, not exactly the more exotic places like the Mediterranean or the Caribbean. Reduced asset values. Hotels are in high-risk zones and face lower property valuations due to mounting flood risks and higher insurance rates. And then adaptation costs, right? So we talk a lot about retrofit, but they're having to invest in these costly protective measures that strengthen infrastructure against extreme weather, but hotter hots and wetter wets continue to get hotter and wetter and more frequent. So there's a little bit of that. And then I wanted to get a sense, because the Four Seasons, I wanted to get a sense of how many of their properties have actually been impacted by climate change. Turns out you cannot find out that information publicly, and I understand why. However, I did find that they have had coastal assets impacted by the impacts of climate change due to things like events like Hurricane Omar. So their Four Seasons resort in the West Indies, that property was closed for an extended period of time in the early 2000s. So this is a little while ago, but I think still relevant. One of their resorts in Hawaii suffered extensive damage to some of its beachfront property because of a tsunami in 2011. And then there was the Surf Club Four Seasons in South Florida that is essentially experiencing sinking. And so between 2016 and 2023, they have sunk from anywhere between 0.8 of an inch to 3 inches.
So that's about 1.5 centimeters to about 8 centimeters.
Yeah, that sounds about right. Yeah. So none of this is great. And then I wanted to get a sense of, okay, so what's happening in the climate in places that are pretty heavily visited and are seen as desirable tourist locations. So in the Mediterranean, it's a major climate change hotspot. It's warming 20% faster than the global average. And that region is really facing severe threats, including extreme drought, reduced precipitation. There's a figure that says it's up to 30% in Southern Europe. But it's also on the other side of that, facing rapid sea level rise, marine heat waves, biodiversity loss. And the number that kept showing up over and over again was that by 2050, water demand could triple, affecting over 510 million people. So we have like all of these direct impacts of climate change, the temperatures rising, more storms, more floods, things like that. So basically, to talk about the stuff that's not super sexy and shiny, but I think still important to this conversation, is that a new report, and new as of February 2025, combined a few different strands of research to say that human-driven impacts of climate change could result in $1.47 trillion in net property value losses from rising insurance costs and shifting consumer demand. And I do want to say that this is like across real estate as a whole, but it primarily impacts places that are seen as high traffic tourism places. So in the United States, it's looking at cities like Miami, Tampa, New Orleans. So there's like clearly a massive financial impact. These resorts are having to reimagine and rethink what their business proposition is going to be in the face of climate change, because it is translating quite explicitly to loss of money. And so I was like, okay, that's interesting. And also, what's the human aspect of this? How do we start to make this make sense for people who are traveling, for tourism, for the yous and me's of the world? So I wanted to get a better sense of how this is impacting where people go and whether it's starting to shift like travel patterns. So there's 3 different aspects of this. One was the climate angle. One is the impact of geopolitics. And the other one is this thing that has kind of popped up called doom tourism, which is actually horrible for the planet and very bad for disrupting biodiversity, both on land and at sea.
And what is doom tourism?
I'm so glad you asked.
No problem at all.
Do you know what doom tourism is? Have you heard of this before?
No, I haven't. No. There's a trend of making AI videos of places that look intentionally crappy, like Croydon in South London, and it's like full of roadmen like trashing the place, even though it's completely made up and it's AI based. And that has a similar name, but I don't think it's what you're talking.
I feel like that could actually be useful for doom tourism to reduce the amount of doom tourism that's happening, make these places not seem desirable. But anyway,
I don't know that Croydon, South London, is under massive climatological or social threat due to an overabundance of tourism and warm weather. But
what are you trying to say
I
about
will
Croydon?
let the council know that this is a potential strategy for them.
So anyway, so doom tourism is also known as last chance tourism. Do you want to take a guess at what that means?
Oh, I see. Yes. Okay. So I can imagine that means the last chance to see the Great Barrier Reef, the last chance to see Venice, the last chance to see the Maldives before they succumb to the impacts of warming and flooding and things like that.
Exactly. So it's this trend of visiting quote unquote endangered destinations, ecosystems, or sites that are on the brink of ecological or functional collapse. So you mentioned a few examples: glaciers, coral reefs, sinking islands.
Have you experienced that directly in terms of your own sense of where you go to travel and stuff?
That's not how we make decisions on travel. And part of it, I think, is because in the back of my mind, I am thinking about the climate angle, even if we're not consciously talking about it every day. Maybe part of that is because of the work that you and I do, but there's also just a part of me that's like, I think visiting India every year and kind of like growing up around that, you would kind of see the effects of like thousands upon thousands of people visiting the Taj Mahal or other places and seeing the effects of just a bunch of people coming to a site and not treating it very kindly. So a part of me has always felt guilty about stuff like that. And one of the things that came out from lots of different articles expanding on doom tourism was this notion that while driven by this desire to see these places before they disappear, this behavior creates this paradox. So what we're really doing is increased tourist traffic further damages the very sites they're visiting because they want to get a last chance to see it. But there are places where, beyond the more mainstream stories of these doomed tourist destinations, that are also being impacted. So there is the valley of Uttarakhand in northern India. It's amongst the Himalayan landscape, and the state and national reports have highlighted that there's a retreat of glaciers, there's a growth of hazardous glacial lakes, and there's an uptick in extreme weather events that lead to landslides, flash floods, and erosion. So this is affecting places all over the world. And one of the things that came out of these these reports that have been tracking developments is a caution towards both unchecked infrastructure development and tourism. So there's doom tourism, which is basically bringing lots of people to different sites that are already over capacity. Over tourism and climate change have created a dangerous feedback loop that endangers Southern Europe's tourism industry. So over the past decade, perennial droughts, population growth, and a surge in tourism have meant that fresh water has become pretty scarce in Ibiza. So this hotel, the Monte Sol, their new owners were like, okay, how do we make it so that we are both responding to climate conditions and being, responsible with the way we operate and manage our hotel? So they took out all the bathtubs in the rooms and they installed only showers. And then they also put more insulation to keep the interiors cool, to reduce their energy use. They set minimum temperature for air conditioning to 19 degrees Celsius. And then they equipped windows with a sensor system that turns off the air conditioning when they're opened. But then you talk about the people side of this. People want to be green. And there's a quote in one of these reports where the GM of the hotel said, people want to be green, but not when it concerns their comfort or their holidays, right? Mm-hmm. So he was saying that, he often gets pushback from clients because they want their rooms at like 16 degrees when it's really, really, really hot.
I suppose that makes sense, isn't it? I mean, the point of your holiday, I'm going to do the whole nothing is new, everything has happened before, is that the rules go out the window, right? It's the day in which you are permitted not to go to work. It's the day in which you don't have to respect the local gentry. It's the world turned upside down, as was the phrase. So, it sort of makes sense. It's that continuation of, we're going to buy expensive meals. We're going to live in a way that we wouldn't do at home because it's too expensive. But we've sort of bought permission to do that by being tourists.
For sure. But I think part of this is like, do we still have the luxury to do that and to think in that way? When the Mediterranean basin is warming 20% faster than global average, and when average temperatures have increased already by 1.26 degrees Celsius in the last 70 years, like that's pretty massive. Yeah. Right?
I mean, you could say that tourism is a product of the 19th century European worldview, that the world had now been dominated and mapped and colonized fully, such that the world was open to you via the wonder of, steamship and rail and everything else that was invented. And tourism in the UK is a product of the railway network. So people could now afford to go to the beach, go to Blackpool or go to Southampton. I don't know if people went to the beach in Southampton, but to Devon or Cornwall or wherever. And so that in that worldview, as we've discussed before, that was the world of abundance. The resources of the world were limitless. Technology was going to solve anything. The great industrial engine of capitalism was steaming full ahead. And so those are the principles and the premises on which this 150-year-old industry is built, are limitless abundance and a world that is dominated by the networks we've established through colonial activities.
However, I don't think that ideal or that vision is applicable anymore. Like we very much have limits. We very much have maximums.
I'm
right?
not. I want to be clear to everyone. I'm not making a defense of colonialism. I'm just pointing out that if that industry, in the same way that we've talked about something like design being founded on industrial principles and therefore is it capable of reform, that industry is founded on a colonial, industrial capitalism worldview, then you're just going to extend those principles into whatever technology or country is available at the time.
But the key takeaway here, I would say, is the summers are getting hotter. They're also getting longer. They're bringing more people to these places because of things like, are we ever going to get a chance to go to the Maldives, or are we going to get a chance to experience these beaches or whatever it is through this idea of doom tourism? And then what they're calling these shoulder months, which are outside of the old peak season, those are also getting more expansive. So essentially the amount of time that people can come to these, tropical, Mediterranean, warm, pleasant locations is getting longer and longer. And so it's just really adding so much of a burden on these locations to be able to manage this capacity and then do it in the face of the impacts of climate change and also find solutions to address the effects and maybe undo some of them, right? And then you also have these shifting tourism patterns, not only because of the doom tourism, but also because of geopolitics. So there are lots of Canadians called snowbirds. They used to kind of come down south to Florida and places like that in the wintertime so that they could have a little bit more of a warmer weather getaway. And they're not coming to the United States anymore. They're going to places like Playa del Carmen in Mexico. And so that's also, again, like pushing people outside of a typical pattern of tourism into other places that might not have the infrastructure to actually manage a wider swath of visitors. Basically, to me, from what I keep reading, tourism is not good for the planet. Even ecotourism, it's really, really not. It's really, really not good for the planet. But one of the other things that I learned about the impacts that cruise ships have, and even yachts, because the smaller scale does not actually preclude them from being quite disastrous for the planet. So cruise ships introduce invasive species to new marine environments through two things: ballast water discharge and hull fouling. Do you know what these things are?
Well, yeah, ships take on ballast water to ensure they stay upright, and they take it on from one part of the world and then they dump it in another part of the world. So they're going to bring various species with them when they do that. And then hull fouling, I'm imagining, is, all the sort of organisms that cling to hulls, like barnacles.
You could just cheat and look at the show notes and say that you know what I'm talking about. You know what
I
I'm
don't
saying?
need to do that, Radha. I'm not that kind of guy. I'm a nautical man. My people are a maritime people.
A man of many skills.
Rule
talents.
Britannia. Britannia, rule the waves. All British schools, they get extensive naval training.
Surrounded by water, so you have to be
I know
adept.
like 30 knots, 30 different knots.
30 of them? Man, I used to be in a mariner troop. Did you know that? My Girl Scout troop was a mariner troop, so we learned about flags and knots and all of that. I know.
You can do semaphore.
Yes, actually, but that's for another conversation.
I feel like that's going to serve you very well in your career.
Yeah, you think so? Sitting at my desk all day in meetings on Teams. So yes, you're absolutely right. So ships take on water to stabilize vessels, but they're trapping larvae, microbes, small organisms, and then releasing them when the ship discharges this water in another port. Hull fouling is organisms like barnacles, seaweed, mussels. They attach themselves to the ship's hull and are transported across oceans. And so essentially what you're doing is you're introducing invasive species, sometimes diseases, to new marine environments that are not equipped to handle them. And they can actually destroy the local species that are inhabiting those marine environments. So it does cause a lot of habitat disruption, biodiversity loss, disease transport, and these regional threats to places like Antarctica that are particularly at risk and can be permanently altered. So one of the things that these new luxury yachts are promoting is that they have new technologies called bio-sea ballast water treatment systems from the bio-UV group. And the entire point of this is that they will defend habitats and ecosystems from non-indigenous organisms. They can reduce the number of invasive species known to travel by clinging to the ship's body or through the ship's ballast water, which can have, again, detrimental impacts on oceanic and freshwater ecosystems. Now, I will say I don't think that's enough to move the needle. It's interesting that, these new business ecosystems are really having to consider the climate angle to even be able to make this something that feels viable to people.
I mean, is that driven by their desire to appeal to tourists, or is that regulatory enforcement sort of saying you need to, put in these measures to reduce the harm to biodiversity that might be caused by these ships?
I can't say for sure. This was in one of their press releases, right? So I don't know where the impetus is, but what they've said is that there's an acknowledgement that cruising is a major source of air, water, and wildlife pollution. It's estimated that staying one night on a cruise and these are the large cruises, expends energy equivalent to 12 times that of a land-based accommodation. Specifically, Ritz-Carlton's new fleets boast these 4 dual fuel engines that use liquefied natural gas as their main energy source. It reduces carbon emissions by 25%. And then they're also featuring those bio-sea ballast water treatment systems.
Well, you'll be pleased to know I've got some statistics too. Do you want some?
Oh, yes.
This is from transportenvironment.org. A cruise ship passenger is responsible for 420 kilograms of CO2 per day versus a land-based tourist, which is 81. So,
oh my
God,
God,
maybe of their cost.
Yeah.
Cruise ships can be more intensive than flying. A week-long Caribbean cruise emits roughly 4 tons of carbon dioxide per person. They drop 176,000 gallons of sewage a week right into the sea, and 1 million tons of grey water, so wastewater from other types.
That does not surprise me because cruise ships are effectively floating cities. The scale of them, the amount of infrastructure that's required, the amount of food that they're processing, the passengers that are on board, it's a lot of resource that is being used. But this kind of emergence of these more boutique luxury cruise, they're not calling them ships, they're yachts is what they're calling them. They have maybe, anywhere from 50 to 100 suites on them. I'm starting to see these more and more. There's another one called Amangati, and they're supposed to be setting sail starting spring of 2027, and it comprises 47 spacious suites, and it's supposed to be this very high-end experience that primarily takes off from the shores of the Mediterranean. So, I wonder if some of this is a response to the impacts of climate change. And then there's also maybe this top-down regulation mandate thing that's shifting the industry as well. But I also think that land-based assets are losing value and becoming increasingly harder to sustain.
Yeah, it's probably worth pulling it apart a bit, isn't it? Because there's various different drivers all happening at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
As you said, these hotels largely are going to be in places that are under threat of climate change because they're on beachfronts and hot places, which is pretty much where you don't want to be. There's also drivers that I imagine are coming from the regulatory space around maritime emissions, because that's been happening in cargo for a while. And also, one of the things that I don't know if it's a trend, because I don't think we work in this type of space, so I don't understand it enough, is this kind of luxurious aspirationalism that we see all the time advertised on the social media platforms, whether it's holidays or rental homes in Dubai is a very popular one for UK people for some reason, or indeed, people taking these glamorous pictures of Grecian palatial villas and things like that. There seems to be this sense of the sort of individualistic influencer luxury entitlement that's driving people to be in these spaces, to document them, to photograph them, to share them, to sort of live out these ideals, which come at enormous carbon costs, because previously they were the preserve of the wealthy and the elite, just talking 20, 30, maybe 50 years ago. And now, because of cheap flight, cheap travel, all the subsidies, they're everybody's. And so people are going to these places that previously required quite a bit of capital to get to, in order to take the photo and say they were there.
So actually, that is another phenomenon called DACA tourism, which is something that's happening in parts of the Asia Pacific, where people literally go and go take a picture of a place to say they were there and then move on to the next location. And it could be a destination as mundane as a very particular tree off of a highway somewhere that everyone has a picture of. I wonder if in 10, 15, 20 years, the decision making maybe hopefully also includes, do I need to go there? Is it actually good for the planet? If I'm being optimistic, I would love to see that as part of the mindset that people have. moving forward. But I'm not as optimistic in our current situation, especially because of the aspirational tourism stuff.
It's interesting that a lot of the sort of like pseudo-archaeological or maybe pseudo-anthropological argument about humans' destruction on the planet has been situated in this idea of agriculture. The point we stopped moving, that's when we started distorting and disrupting ecosystem. And so there's sometimes this sort of romantic callback to like nomadic lifestyle to say that's what we should be back to. And I wonder if there's something to that actually. Like I know that slow tourism is a thing. For those that can do it, taking months to kind of move quite slowly between places like across Europe by rail, for example, and you can stop for a few weeks in a particular place and maybe get a part-time job, help out a little bit or volunteer somewhere and then move on to the next place. You know, that's been a thing that students have done, interrailing. Do you have interrailing in the US?
I don't think so.
No, you have road trips, don't you? You just get in a car and drive across interstates. Yeah, so interrailing's been a thing in Europe for years. And also, frankly, again, I should have been born in the 1810s. I think we should bring back German spas. That's what we should be doing.
German spas?
German spa towns. Yeah, German spa towns. You know, I want the healing spring.
The final point that I'll make is that, you know, you mentioned this idea of slow tourism and people taking their time. I think what ends up happening is not everyone is thinking about doing these things in moderation. So everyone hops on a trend and then they hype that trend and it just expands into a place that actually becomes really, really harmful. And so there's this cognitive bias that is working against us where it's like, if tons and tons of people are going to these at-risk sites each year, folks can tend to think, okay, one more person isn't really going to do that much damage. That is kind of working against us a little bit when it comes to things like this. So even if there is a solution, I feel like the aspect of scale becomes problematic.
Well, the solution, Radha, is that AI liberates us all from labor so that we can live the life we want and no longer have a desire to escape our daily lives and go on holidays to glamorous destinations.
But in the meantime, there should just be a campaign where they use all that AI imagery to make all these desirable locations look horrendous, and then no one will want to go.
What is that called? BBC did a podcast about it recently. Decline porn. That's what it's called. Decline porn.
Interesting.
Yeah. It's a bit like ruin porn a few years ago where people were really seeing pictures of ruined Soviet monuments and stuff.
Maybe that is the solution to doom tourism.
Yeah.
No solutions, just a lot of sad stuff.
People are unimaginative, thoughtless, and careless is your conclusion.
No, I love people.
And I'm supposed to be the pessimist, aren't I, really?
No, I love people and I do have a lot of hope for things. I just feel like we have to notice these patterns so that we can start to change them. We have to articulate them and name them so we can start to do something differently. And I think that is what I'm trying to do here.
Amazing. I envy you so much. What a saint. What a saint.
But anyway, sir, let me get back to my serious business.
See you later.
Toodles.
Toodles.